Hey everyone, it's Thyworm, and today I want to break down patch 0.7.5 in last Epoch and give my first impressions. I will also cover the 2 hotfixes we got so far whenever that's relevant. Starting with the new campaign Act 7. I played through the chapter, which adds about another hour to the campaign depending on your clear speed and familiarity with the game. And I have to say that I really enjoyed seeing more of the Divine era. Act 7 mostly takes place in that era where 2 armies are fighting each other. That's not only part of the lore, but you actually see the NPCs battle in the maps, which I thought was a nice touch. On top of this, there are many new enemies, some interesting new boss fights where I really enjoyed, particularly a fight with a dividing ice shard, new quests of course, and a few passive skill points to earn, but not a lot though, which probably has to do with balancing the builds. One remark about this is that the passive points are currently very front loaded and available early in the game, which lets you quickly develop your build. They get a lot scarcer later on, turning the end game into something more grindy. In my latest playthrough, which I did very fast, I had a surplus of passive skill points, about 5, before I reached the end of time and could choose my mastery, and then spend those skill points. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to swap around some quest rewards throughout the different acts for a more even distribution of skill points rewards. On to skills. The patch offered 2 new skills and a specialization tree for the paladin skill Sigils of Hope. The new skills are Earthquake for the shaman, which originally unlocked at level 15 but since 0.7.b at level 10. I haven't played with this skill yet, so I won't comment on it. The other new skill, however, is the pillar of my new character, Flame Ward. It is an amazing skill, really. It offers damage reduction, ward, and has a chance to retaliate. I specced into a bunch of ward and some protection to make myself really tanky while finding other synergies with ward as well. I'm working on a build guide for this. Flame Ward is currently a very strong and a fun skill to use, and it is intended to replace Fire Shield and Ice Ward. Currently, you can still use both of those skills in conjunction with Flame Ward, and that shit escalates quickly, I can tell you. You should try it out while you still can. The patch also implemented a new game mechanic, gambling. You can now gamble on an item at Artem, a new NPC in the Council Chamber and the End of Time. Gambling allows you to spend a set number of gold on a base item, which is then randomized in terms of quality, tier, and affixes. It's a fun system, but is it useful? Maybe. I'm going to find that out relatively soon. What doesn't work so well is that you have to wait for the crafting shop to refresh. This makes gambling rather tedious currently, and gambling, as we all know, should be made as accessible as possible, especially for kids as part of their upbringing, meaning that the inventory should automatically refresh so I can gamble my millions away and maybe get something good. A bunch of item changes were made, most of them quality of life changes. You can now search and sort the personal storage chest, for example, which is really neat. This allows you to easily find an item for specific builds, for example a ward build that I'm doing. Holding Alt and Control now also shows the range of implicit modifiers. Implicits are modifiers that roll based on the item type, and those implicits cannot be changed, but their values can. This is why it is useful to be able to see those values so you can evaluate if you got lucky on your implicit or not. Items you can't equip now show up with a cross in the bottom right corner, which is useful when you're leveling a new character. These are all very nice, smooth changes, but there's a new crafting inventory tab, and honestly I don't really like it. It makes crafting more of a hassle and everything takes so much longer to do. Previously the crafting tab was an extension of the inventory, which made crafting smooth. I would put an item in the bench, craft a bit, put it back in the inventory, put another in, craft some more, but now I can't do that anymore. I have to constantly swap tabs, swap between the crafting tab and the inventory. Shattering items sucks big time as well. It's just not very well designed. I really hope they either revert this change or come up with a solution, because to me this is a worse experience than before. I won't discuss skill changes today, these change so often and I don't have enough experience with all of them to say something sensible, so I will just leave this out. On to uniques. There are quite a few interesting changes here. Very noticeable is the overall buff to unique stats. Before the patch I owned around 80% of all uniques, and every time I now find a duplicate it is a significant upgrade in terms of stats. Some uniques are basically twice as good, suddenly making them much more viable for builds, but also for endgame, and I really like that direction. Uniques in the current meta are mostly leveling items with a few exceptions. Crafted rares are almost always better. By buffing uniques, this slowly shifts, making mid-tier uniques suddenly a lot more powerful and serious considerations for the endgame builds, and that is a good change. I feel that we should be in a situation where incorporating 2 uniques in your build doesn't degrade the quality of your character but actually enhances it. I also found a new unique, Frozen Ire. It's a pretty good scepter, definitely definitely an endgame worthy item, and it just so happened that it fits perfectly into my build. It offers a good bunch of stats, a ton of freeze and chill, additional cold damage and some spell damage, really cool for a frost character. Morning Frost got nerfed a little with the increased health now ranging from 3 to 10% down from a static 10%. Prism Reps got heavily nerfed, giving 2 to 8 elemental leech instead of 30%, although it does now give 30% crit strike chance. Urzel's Pride got nerfed, only providing 1% mana regen per 100 armor instead of 2. I fear that devs may have watched my latest 2 builds with Infinite Warpath, which basically relied on this item to work properly. I fear this change has killed those builds, which is unfortunate. You can still spin infinitely, but it won't work as well, unless you maybe start using staves. Volcanus got buffed, now giving also increased fire damage, 37 to 57%, which is significant. And finally, Irun's Wisdom got nerfed, now only 3% melee leech instead of 30%. Items are up next. Staves and offhands are added to the game. The affixes in these new items are particularly interesting, with mana regen rate, reduced mana cost and implicits of up to plus 14 intelligence to catalysts. That is a really high number, and it is massive for certain builds, like a Lich crit build. There are 3 new affixes: increased minion spell damage, increased damage while channeling, and armor and protection while channeling. This, in conjunction with the buff to integrate this patch, seems an attempt to make integrate mage viable. Not sure if it worked, however. If you're playing that, let me know in the comments how it feels after the patch. There are a few other small changes, but nothing super interesting, so let's move on to enemies. The heal if not damaged recently monster affix now has a visual effect that intensifies when it begins healing and can no longer spawn alongside an increased health or high stun avoidance mod. They added a deadly if not damaged recently monster affix, which causes enemies to deal twice as much damage. Mechanics, just one change, but a big one, because you can now also leech off of minion damage. Previously it was only player damage. That's pretty huge actually, and should make a summoner build a lot more tanky if you decide to invest in health and leech, because your minions are constantly damaging monsters. I haven't tried this out yet, but it would be an interesting change on my necro army build for sure. Some UI changes. Apparently the cursor was redesigned. This should make it easier to keep track. I honestly didn't notice anything like this, but I also don't have any issues with the cursor. The crafting tab is now a separate tab, but we already covered that. They updated the equipped item and stats overview sections to match the other parts of the user interface, and they updated the background and border art for items. In terms of sound and graphics, the most notable changes are for me the 2 new soundtracks that got implemented, which I've really enjoyed listening to. Performance wise, there was a focus on reducing stutter. I really didn't suffer from stutter, I would say. I suffer from all other performance issues however, like freezes, lag and most of all frame rate drops. While doing the monolith, these haven't improved compared to 0.7.4, which is a shame, but now that they announced the game releases in Q4 2020, they got some time to tackle these performance issues, so that's a good thing. Then some notable bug fixes. What really stood out to me is the loading bug, which is now resolved. No longer does it take 10 seconds after loading before your character can actually move or open a menu when you first enter the game. Right now it's pretty much instant, which feels super nice. They also fixed bugs which made movement skills put you outside the map. I had that multiple times with Shield Rush, rushing off the map and basically with no way to get back. To conclude, I think this is a good sustainable patch. It is nothing groundbreaking like the previous one was, in my opinion. That really changed the game in all sorts of ways, and this one is much smaller in scope, although adding a chapter in the story is still something of course. It's just that you play through that once and then you don't really notice it's there anymore. This is a great patch for new players, but a rather average one for seasoned players who are farming endgame. Patch did open up a few new build options for sure. One of them I'm exploring right now. I like the overall direction the uniques are headed in, which is pretty amazing, and all in all this has been a very decent patch. Let's hope they fix the crafting menu and the gambling, and then I'm happy, ready for the next patch. And that's all I currently have for you on patch 0.7.5. Follow me on Twitter at Thyworm. Thanks for watching and making it to the end, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.